cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay, cause my message...
Your discretion is advised. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey guys, just trying out some new sound bites here. So, how's everybody doing? This case is driving me bananas. You know, it's like circular logic every which way I turn, and I'm just trying to figure out, I just want to know the timeline, right? What is this frickin' timeline? So I'm sure people have this figured out, but I still haven't figured it out. So I thought I'd go over a little bit of my thoughts with everybody and see what they think, and if they can give me the answers to some of this stuff that I'm missing. So I'm just going to pull up that website I shared with everybody yesterday, the 1122 4.com, and just starting from the beginning, right? And God bless whoever made this, because this was a lot of work. Let me tell you something. It's really helpful. I bet you prosecution and defense look at this. I mean, this unless they're law clerks or assistants did better. But if we look at just the warrants, right? We're just going to look at the warrants. So, and try to make sense of it a little now that we know a little bit more. Let's see, the first thing that happened was an order to seal. Let me just see what that is. And we cannot see that. Okay. So that's nothing. Whoops, hold on. Let me go back here. Let's get back in there. So that was interesting. Okay. And then the next thing we have is November 16th. There's an AT&T tower dump on that early morning from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And that's just like getting all the numbers in that area. And then later they get an inland cell tower dump. Inland Cellular. So it's two companies that they're getting the info from. And then on November 16th, they asked for 2 redacted unknown subscriber phone numbers, and they want all of the information between these two people. My guess is there was a lot of activity going back and forth with these two numbers, like they noticed a pattern. So they wanted to find out who these people are and examine it. Although, when I look at the next thing and it says 3 redacted unknown subscriber phone numbers, it makes me wonder if we've got the 4 who died and then 2 survivors. That's 6. So this only adds up to 5. I would have just suspected that they got all of the victims' information right away. And the 2 surviving roommates. But that would be 6. And also they would know the name of the subscriber. It wouldn't say unknown. It would just say 3 redacted subscribers. So I'm not sure. Then they get a Verizon cell dump. So they're basically getting all the major carriers in that area from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. Just a big cell dump. And the first 2, there's no way they could have gone through it that quickly and all on the same day. So this was all just done ahead of time. Interesting. I'd really like to know what those phone numbers, who they belong to. Okay, so then The next thing they do is, it looks like, okay, all the bank records, right? So on November 19th, the next thing they're doing is they're getting all these bank records for the victims. Bank of America, Cash App, Venmo, Umpqua Bank. And that makes sense, right? You're going to look at the victims' finances to see if they're into any shady dealings or any financial troubles that could have led them to become a victim in this type of a crime. So that's not unusual at all. It makes sense. Now, they did get exterior surveillance camera footage from November 12th at 9 p.m. until November 13th at 12 p.m. From the bank on 609 South Washington Street. Is that the footage of them walking down the street with Jack Showalter when they're talking about Adam? And is that surveillance footage continued to be under, seal because that means something? I mean, I know Shannon Gray, Steve Gonsalves's attorney, the Gonsalves family's attorney, stated that that meant nothing, that Adam and they were just talking about boy stuff. But I don't know if that's true or not. They can say things that are misleading, not necessarily be a lie. They could believe that's what it's about, but is that really what it's about? I don't know. And that was one of the first questions in the case, along with the grub truck footage. Okay, move on from that. On the 20th, now they're just zeroing in on Kaylee, and they want to get her Facebook and Instagram stuff on the 20th. And they want it from August through November. And then the next day, let's see. Actually, it's not until November 30th that they serve a subpoena for Ethan. So they start with Kelly, then they go to Ethan for Facebook. And right around that time, they're sending Maddie Mogan Snapchat. And then Kaylee again, her Apple. And then they get around to Maddie's Facebook. It's interesting that it's also disjointed. I'm not sure. I guess even though these people are deceased, you need these search warrants to search their records. Even though they're deceased, their privacy rights are still intact, which I guess I should be happy about, considering we really don't have much privacy anywhere else in life. I guess when we're deceased, these things can be sealed. I think that's probably a good thing. But then they start looking at some phone numbers, and the dates are always August through November. So whatever caused or led up to this violent attack, from the beginning, it appears like they're narrowing it from just, August to September, which makes sense because that's around the time they were living together. And maybe when this group became more closely knit, then they do all the Snapchats, then they do more Facebook and Instagram. If you count all of this up, which I've done in the past, Kaylee is the one that has more search warrants than anyone else. And it's not by a lot, but it's by a few. And she's also the first person they searched a warrant for. And does that mean something, right? Is that something that implies that she was somehow the target? Probably, because that's what a lot of the theories were in the very beginning. And her parents, out of all the parents, have been the most vocal, which would make sense if for some reason they were told that, something in her life, or something she was involved in, or someone she had come across had brought this, unfortunately, into that house. Not that it was her fault, but that they were able to tie some things together based on the subpoenas they already had, or the warrants they already had, which was the phone records. And then again, she's the first one that they look at, social media for. And was that their theory in the beginning? It's hard to know. There are so many different things floating around, even on the media, which I don't believe, unless they're saying it in court or it's in a court filing. We can't really rely on that as being the truth. So they go through all of their banks again: American Express, Numerica, Wells Fargo, Banner Bank, Discover, Idaho Department of Labor, which for a while I thought meant they worked for the state of Idaho, but now I realize I think that's just to find out what their jobs were, like where everybody worked. Not that they all worked at the same place or worked for the state of Idaho. So I don't know why I didn't realize that to begin with. In terms of all these banks, just because they're subpoenaing these records, does that mean these people all have bank accounts here? Like, I'm just curious, why these banks in particular? Are these the most popular banks in that area? This is what I'm guessing, right? They're just casting out a net here to take a look at some of this stuff. But if you notice, so far, BF and DM haven't had anything. They haven't done anything on Bethany or Dylan. And then again, the first person to have something with Tinder is Kaylee, and that's on November 29th. Right? And that's from June 2021. So that's it's over a year. And then again, they narrow in on Kaylee again with Yahoo, Reddit, which we know Brian Koberger was on Reddit. But they wouldn't have known that then, right? It's only December 1st. And nobody else has their Reddit account subpoenaed. Does that just mean nobody else has a Reddit account? Then we get more Facebook. I guess they didn't get it all the first time. I'm confused about that. Then again with Kaylee, her Google account, but nobody else's. And still nothing for DM or BF. Then they look at Maddie's Tinder, Maddie's TikTok. All right, so now here we are on December 12th. And this is the timeline that I want to look at a little bit more closely. Because if you've seen some of my previous videos, there's one that states that Mrs. Gonsalves gives the date December 13th for when she and Mr. Gonsalves spoke with Moscow Police Department, and she was guaranteed that 100% this would be solved. And she also said his name was, quote, being swirled around. That was December 13th. If that's the case, what did they find up here that would give them reason to believe Brian Koberger was involved at all? Anne said in open court that there's no evidence to support the stalking theory, and that there's no evidence to support that he has any ties to the victims, including any electronic evidence, like on his devices and things. So I just find that really interesting. I believe it, but that's what's so confusing about this case, right? If she hadn't said that, I would think, well, maybe they connected on Tinder or something. But that would be a connection, and everybody keeps saying there's no connection. In court, I mean, people from court are saying it. In the beginning, they were, Steve Gonsalves was saying something different. But the police have never said that I'm aware of. So it's not really helpful, right? So what happened on December 12th? Well, then we have something else from Kaylee that nobody else has. Extreme Networks, which I believe is a server. And I remember in that one interview where Steve was talking, they were talking about all this. They mentioned that they were finally able to get into her server, something like that. Yeah, decrypted access to computer. They met the next day after that with the Gonsalves family. I wonder if that was specifically just them. It sounds like it. Is the reason they've been out in the front so much is because of things that they found that caused them to believe that Kaylee was the person that was the target? I mean, that's what it seems like, just looking back logically, going through this stuff without any of the noise. If you were just given this data and told, what do you think about this? Then we have BK. His first warrant is the AT&T warrant on December 23rd. And they wanted that information from November 12th. It's interesting that they choose. Okay, so it's a full day before 12 a.m. Okay, so it's a full 48 hours, right? And then they look into his Google account. But that's on January 3rd. And then they have this Seagate 2 terabyte external USB drive, which for some reason I felt like that was something that they created from all the data they gathered, but it's more likely that it's just his USB drive that he holds his own data on. I'm not sure. Let's see. What does it say over here? Data compilations relating to violence or a fight or motive or hostility, communications, emails, texts, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram, contact stored, location, info stored in cloud account, internet history, bookmarks, written or audio recorded notes, indicia of residency in or ownership or possession of the premises, and any of the above items. Okay. So they're going to have his location info. There's so many different ways to find it, right? Then they do WSU. And now they're looking at Brian's Tinder for the same dates as Kaylee's Tinder. And then they look at Reddit for Brian. So these are two things that they, that are interesting. Yik Yak, that's kind of a remote one, but and then Twitter, TikTok, Google, that all makes sense. And then Strava, they're saying unknown, but we have a feeling this could be him, because I remember at some point seeing a Strava map of his run. Don't know if that was accurate. I've learned a lot from following this case, because there was so much rumor and speculation, and a lot of it had to do with the way the case was being presented. You could tell that there was something being withheld, and that drew a lot of people in. Also, just the sheer horror of what happened to these 4 students and wanting an explanation. So that's kind of like the search warrants there. Let's go to the first search warrant was for Brian, and it was on, let's just look at it one more time. First search warrant for Brian was December 23rd. That's 7 days before he gets arrested. But on December 12th, when they were able to access the Extreme Networks server from Kaylee, the day after is when they contacted the Gonsalves and met with them. And that's also a day when they made comments outside the courthouse talking about, who knows, we could use, genealogical databases, people have cousins and relatives. Our kids have cousins, you know, and relatives that go to the school in this area, right? So clearly someone talked to them about this as a resource for figuring out what this DNA was. So clearly by that point, I would imagine that the DNA, the STR, which is what CODIS uses STR, and it had been run through that system, and they had not gotten a match. And they were delivering this news like, look, we don't have a match in CODIS from this DNA. Now, I would imagine they would have talked about all the DNA at that point, because like we've talked about, there's unknown B and unknown D, which implies there's a known A and known C, which, you know, is Brian Koberger's DNA C or A? And then who's the other one? But at that point, it wouldn't have been even that. They would have just said, look, we found 6 samples of DNA that we want to send off. We've tested them all here through STR CODIS, and we haven't gotten any hits on any of them, I would imagine, right? But we can maybe send it off to, you know, a lab such as Othram, who has developed these techniques to extract SNP file. It's more markers from the DNA. Instead of like 10 markers, it's like 23 million markers or something. And it's something crazy. It's just so much more specific, the STR. And the CODIS system is not as specific. And so the question I have then is, did they send all of those DNA, all the unknown DNA that they collected, off to build at Othram, and the only one that they were able to develop further was the one that ultimately led to Brian Koberger? These are the questions that I think are really important to understand, because if they did that, then we know the investigation is being fairly conducted. But if they didn't do that, then there needs to be an explanation as to why, right? So I just found this and I wanted to share it because I think it's pretty cool. Let's just have a listen to David Middleman, who is the CEO of Othram Labs. And just as a reminder, a large part of the funding that came to Othram to get it off the ground was from a known, you know, political operative who at the time had basically been, quote, canceled from society for being a racist. And I did a video about that, but it's just an interesting choice for a go-to person to help you with your funding for your new lab. So let's have a listen to David Middleman. This was an interview conducted at CBS 8 San Diego over a year ago.
And what kind of work pick it up from there, and what did you have to do to identify her?
So in 2020, when the San Diego Medical Examiner's Office, they did, as you said, an exhumation. They started with some, conventional DNA testing. They use what's called STR testing, or some people refer to this as CODIS, and they built a DNA profile that consists of 20 markers, and you can use those 20 markers to search CODIS. And if someone's in CODIS and you collect 20 markers from a crime scene or from forensic evidence, then you can make a match and say this person's in CODIS. The challenge for these unidentified remains is that CODIS is primarily populated by forensic casework from suspects. So it's usually criminals that are in CODIS. You get convicted of a crime and then you end up in CODIS. So victims, unidentified human remains, are usually victims. They're almost never represented in CODIS. And so you can do the proper testing and not get a result. So at this point, STR testing hasn't produced an identity, but they've got DNA because they've exhumed her body. And so this is where, the kind of work we do comes in. They actually went and got funding through NamUs. And just as a quick backdrop on that, NamUs is this program that the U.S. government runs. It's run by the National Institute of Justice, and NamUs catalogs all the unidentified human remains in this country. And there's probably 14 or 15,000 folks right now in the NamUs database that are unidentified. But this is a gross underestimate. Not everyone's required to report to NamUs. And so my guess is there could be as many as 50,000 unidentified folks right now in the country. But anyways, 15,000 in this database. And so NamUs has been cataloging these cases, but also provides the resources and funding to work them. So
So the federal government, passed by the Department of Justice, has a national database that banks unknown people who have been found but not named, which has got to be one of the saddest things in the world, right? So that is a noble effort, I believe. I think that's something that is a really good thing, right? I think we can agree with the DNA. There are a lot of good things that come out of it, like being able to identify someone so that they can be put to rest, their family can have some peace, and these sort of things. And so they have this database. He's saying NamUs, but it's probably like Name Us, I'm guessing. It's spelled NAM, capital U, capital S. So I'm assuming it's Name Us. In other words, like we're missing or we're dead and no one's claimed us. So name us. So he's saying that this database exists. We're not the only country to have these types of databases for the missing that have, passed on, or for people who have been found that are unidentified. And so the government, if you're going to work on one of these cold cases and you have some DNA, the government will fund that search because it's actually a good thing. I'm happy to hear they want to help fund that search so that you can find perhaps who that missing person is, or maybe a relative of that missing person based on the SMP profile, because they're able to extract more markers with a program that they use. So that's what he's talking about right now.
San Diego came up short with the STR profile matching to an identity in CODIS. They went to NamUs, and NamUs funded the necessary work for them to take the next step. That next step involved sending forensic evidence to us. And so they literally sent a piece of the skeletal remains to Othram in Houston. And what we did is we built a DNA extract. We extracted DNA from these remains. We've worked with remains that are over 100 years old.
So I just want to stop there and mention that he just said that NamUs contracted with them so that they could extract this DNA from the skeleton of a missing person and develop this profile, because they have the means with which to do that. We know that the Idaho State Police don't. We also know that most places don't. And in fact, Othram apparently is one of the few companies, or maybe the only company, that's done this type of investigation at this point. So they are, quote, cutting edge, and they really just got started in, I think, 2017 or 2018. And it was all about the cold cases. But as we can see, it's escalated now into active cases. But what I found most interesting is that they are getting paid by the federal government with the missing persons issue, with the unidentified remains issue. So when we start looking at Othram and FBI and their role in this, was Othram, it wouldn't surprise me, in other words, then, if Othram was contracted by the federal government to build this profile, right? That doesn't surprise me. So you have the federal government paying for Othram to develop this profile, and then it's given back to the FBI, and that's when the FBI searches through, I'm assuming, MyHeritage or GEDmatch. And that's when they're able to link this unknown suspect's DNA to extended family members. So the interesting thing is with CODIS, for example, the SCR, you can get aunts, uncles, moms, dads, siblings. But with with the SNP and this technique they're using, you will get up to fifth cousins. So now they have this unknown suspect DNA from the knife snap, or I'm sorry, the sheath, the snap on the sheath, and they are able to identify X amount of people that are potentially related. Because the further out you get on the family tree, the less the probability, the less accurate it is. They're still just basing it on possibilities, right? And statistics. Like if it's your mom or dad, it's going to be basically like 100% accurate. But as you go out further, it gets less accurate. So it's pretty interesting.
So even though these remains were 50 years old, this is actually not unusual for the kind of work we have to do at Othram. And we built a DNA extract and used a process called forensic grade genome sequencing. And this is a specialized test. There's a lot of kinds of DNA testing, just like there's a lot of writers and a lot of journalists and everything else. This is a specific kind of DNA testing exclusively for forensic use. And it takes into account kind of the complexities you see in forensics: old DNA, degraded, chemically damaged, not a lot left of it, probably mixed up with bacteria and other non-human sources. And so we use this forensic grade genome sequencing. We built an exhaustive profile, and from there, our forensic genetic genealogy team used that profile instead of to match exactly in a database like CODIS to find any relatives, right? Are there any distant relationships that we could uncover that would give us clues to her identity? So that's kind of the high-level process that we had to follow to generate leads that the law enforcement could use to trace back her identity.
People are familiar with the Golden State Killer case, and I think generally they're familiar with genetic genealogy, tracing back relatives. What relative were you able to locate with this individual? Because my understanding from the police department is she had very recently immigrated to the United States from Portugal. So did that present any problems for you?
How people in 1950 lost weight.
My 1950s grandma literally ate as much as she wanted and never.
Yeah, it sure did. And this is a really interesting case because you'll hear people, that have a familiarity with genetic genealogy and forensic genetic genealogy, and they're going to say, look, the databases are biased towards Northern Europeans. So if you're not Northern European or you're not American, it's not possible to track back an identity. And the truth is, it is challenging. If you're not Northern European, you're likely to be less represented. And this person, she has ancestry that's European, but as you probably know, she has Portuguese ancestry, so it's not necessarily the most well represented in the database. And then the second challenge that you're aware of is that she also was a recent immigrant. So what did we do? So we were able to trace back a distant relative that was from New Jersey. And in speaking to these folks, none of the people that we had mapped back to in New Jersey were incredibly close relationships. We're talking about in the range of fourth to sixth cousin. So this is very distant. I don't even know who my fourth cousins are. So this is quite a distant relationship, fourth to sixth cousin. And as these people began to talk about this person and the case amongst their community, believe it or not, there was some folks that recognized some of the details of the case and actually said they might have remembered somebody. And so this led to some additional investigative work. Law enforcement was able to make contact with a handful of folks and talk back through this knowledge that people had about a person that they remember that had then had vanished, and this little by little allowed investigators to piece back some clues that led them to a possible family that she may be from. And then it was confirmatory DNA testing that then established that she, in fact, was the person that was being spoken of in these circles. And so this is an important thing. I think it's a really interesting case, and it's an important thing to share with folks, which is that sometimes you'll do genetic genealogy, like you mentioned, some of these popular cases, and you center on a specific person or a close relative. But very often, the genetic genealogy is just kind of a way to generate leads. Sometimes it's more than genetic genealogy. In this case, it was a combination of biogeographical ancestry, understanding her historical origins, and then that combined with distant relatives who knew.
This guy's just like a genetic nerd, right? Like he's super into like genealogy. It doesn't necessarily mean it's nefarious, right? And so it sounds like he wants to do good things, but there's a cost to that, meaning solving the cold cases. Maybe he's got this drive to do that and the government's willing to help. But at the end of the day, the government just wants more of this info so that it's easier to identify criminals going forward. And that's kind of like the whole question for everyone right now when we're watching this case. Just taking out, I know it matters if Brian Koberger is innocent or guilty, but just taking him out of the equation and looking at it at a higher level, right? Is this what we want? Do we want the government to develop these databases that can then be utilized to solve crimes, in the investigative phase, not the cold case phase? And what's the difference between doing it in the beginning phases of the crime versus like 20 years later? Why is it okay? We don't mind them doing it 20 years later. It's not an issue to solve a cold case, but up front, if they utilize this technique, that's a problem. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying, like, these are the questions that come to mind. Oh, damn it. So sorry about that. So anyway, basically, those are the questions that we have, right? And so then I looked up GEDmatch too, because I keep hearing GEDmatch, and I was pretty certain it was some type of a DNA database, which it is. And if you've had you can have your DNA checked through them, and then they store it and give you all kinds of information, like ancestry.com. But they have a much, it seems like their DNA analysis has a lot more markers and information it can provide to you. It may be more accurate. But the other thing that it does is it allows, law enforcement to access it, but you have to opt in now. Now that could be new for GEDmatch, but what I thought was interesting is they have a certain name for it, and the name they have for it is a genetic witness. So you can either do a DNA through them and get your DNA information and find out your familial ties, or if you've already had a DNA profile done, you can transfer that file to them. They'll upload it and then match it in with everyone else. And that's pretty standard for any DNA test that you have, right? And you obviously need to be careful who you're giving these tests to, and if you're getting your DNA checked, because you might just be called up and told that you're a witness to a murder or a suspect in a murder, all because you decided to put your DNA in one of these databases. Now, GEDmatch offers the opt-in, and they tell you have the ability to like be a hero and opt in and be a genetic witness. That's the term they're using, okay, which I find really interesting. And I think that just from what Ann said in court, that GEDmatch was something that was used. I'm wondering if the opt-in portion is something that developed more recently, and I'm guessing that it is, because after the Golden State Killer, I think some of these companies wised up to the fact that they could be considered liable if they're not being more transparent with what they're doing. Some of them, thankfully, are very privacy oriented and did not want to give law enforcement access to their databases, which that's awesome.
Something about what it might have happened to this person. I'm not even sure it's clear how she ended up in San Diego. I think that investigators know that she had started from New Jersey, and then somehow she ended up in San Diego, and I think they're still trying to uncover of someone, and then to connect with other folks that might have known her in the time.
Children, those two daughters, maybe had to do DNA tests, but can you tell me like how long it took you to actually find this relative in the New Jersey area?
It didn't take us a long time to build the profile and find the relatives, but there was a good amount of time that was spent having the conversation, connecting with folks, and then law enforcement, working side by side with law enforcement to basically reach out to these folks as well.
So it didn't take them a long time to identify these people. It took more time calling them up and kind of discussing with them and explaining to them why they are being contacted, which you can imagine is going to be the bulk of it, right? You've got to cold call somebody and let them know that their DNA has been distantly related to a suspect in a murder or to a body that was found 30 years ago. And you got to imagine like the skepticism you might feel, or the shock, or maybe you're aware that you had a relative go missing and it's been in the family lore for a while. And now you're like, oh my gosh. So, that makes sense that a lot of this has to do with talking to people that you've found this unknown DNA to connect with.
Just to give you perspective, like we started the case, we received the evidence for this case in the fall of 2020, and so it gives you a little perspective. We built that profile, and early this year we were beginning to chase leads, and one thing led to the other.
Interesting. So they got it in November, so that would have been. And he's talking about a cold case, so it's different. He's not talking about a murder suspect, but it's the same lab, it's the same person, they do the same tests, it's just for a different purpose. And he's saying in November they got the sample, and then early that year they were then able to start talking to some of the quote leads or genetic witnesses that they were able to identify. So when Othram got the sample from Idaho State Police, what was the date, right? What was the date? And then did they start then talking to these quote genetic witnesses?
Together, and we were eventually able to center on someone. So I think if you consider the time frame in which this case was unsolved, right, half a century, it was pretty quick.
Hello, everyone. This is Joe Kudla, founder and CEO of Viore. And today I'm going to walk you through some of the details of one of my favorite pants, the AIM.
But if you think about it in terms of like, being able to find a close relative and immediately resolve the case, it took a while. The case was end-to-end resolved in less than a year, though, right, from the time that we got the evidence.
Okay. Do you happen to know how the person that
So he said less than a year. They moved a lot faster in the Koberger case. Is that because they developed, they got exponentially faster just from experience?
you matched up, the third or fourth cousin, I think you said, had they done like a 23andMe test, or had they been in trouble with the law and had their DNA in there?
It's a good question. We don't search law enforcement databases, so I don't think this person was in trouble with the law. We search genealogical databases that are consented for law enforcement use. So what happened?
So that part's important too. So in Othram, they are capable of searching genealogical databases that have been consented for law enforcement use. So what that tells me is, and this is something that Ann's kind of deduced and other people, but I'm just figuring it out now myself and explaining it for others that might not have caught up to it. What it's telling me is at Othram, not only did they develop the SMP profile, because it doubled in size, like Ann said, which makes sense. I don't know that that's necessarily something that's suspect. The SMP file will get bigger because they're creating more markers. They're able to identify more markers, so they have to save a larger file. but that means that Othram went and looked through the databases that are okay to use, where the users, this is the list of users who have consented to allowing you to use their DNA for a missing person or law enforcement or research, which you can do, at least I know in some databases, including ancestry.com, where you can choose, you can opt in to let them use your DNA for research and then opt in for law enforcement. And so if you opt out, they should not be looking at it. But like we know from Vargas, they do anyway. So what makes the most sense and what's, I think, been figured out at this point is Othram took the SDR, was able to identify more markers on this unknown DNA, created the file, looked through some databases that they were legally allowed to, and still didn't find a match, and then gave it to the FBI. And the FBI then searched the databases that law enforcement is not explicitly allowed to look at. And that's where Vargas came in. And what's really interesting about Vargas is she gave us that information. She's an incredibly brave woman for doing that, because if you recall, right after that, she got visited by the FBI and claimed witness intimidation, which I fully agree with. But you know what? It's not the first time where somebody has gone ahead and looked at some of this DNA stuff that the government's doing and had some problems. So I'll read you an article from 2008. And Bicca Barlow is brought up here. So State Crime Lab analyst Catherine Troyer was running tests on Arizona's DNA database when she stumbled across two felons with remarkably similar genetic profiles. The men matched at 9 of the 13 locations on chromosomes, commonly used to distinguish people. So she's just running tests in a database, and she finds two felons who have pretty much the same genetic profile because they're matching in areas that are unique. So the FBI estimated the odds of unrelated people sharing those genetic markers to be as remote as 1 in 113 billion, right? Because that's what they're telling us. It's like octillion now, right? But here she finds two men who are unrelated in CODIS who, if you didn't know any better, you would say they were genetically related. She looked at the mug shots of the two felons, and there was some doubt as to whether they were related because one was black and the other was white. Not that that completely eliminates it, but you get the point. In the years after her 2001 discovery, Troyer found dozens of similar matches, each seeming to defy impossible odds. As word spread, these findings by a little-known lab worker raised questions about the accuracy of the FBI's DNA statistics, and this ignited a legal fight over whether the nation's genetic databases ought to be open to wider scrutiny. Now, we have to keep in mind, we're not talking about S&P profiles here, which are even more specific. This is STR. But that's what they used for a long time. The FBI laboratory, which administers the National DNA Database System, tried to stop distribution of Troyer's results and began an aggressive behind-the-scenes campaign to block similar searches elsewhere, even those ordered by courts, a Times investigation found. So this is insane. So this lady was someone who worked with CODIS. She just found something that was odd one day. She was a crime analyst in Arizona. Oh, these two people aren't related, but they share genetic markers that are so unique, it makes it seem like they are related. That's odd because they say that the chances of that happening is 1 in 113 billion. And I just found that one. Okay. But then she noticed over time that she was finding more and more to the point where she found dozens. So 1 in 113 billion doesn't sound like an accurate figure. And so when she started talking about this and writing about this and lecturing or whatever it is about this, the FBI began a smear campaign against her, aggressive behind the scenes campaign. They tried to block her distribution, even tried to block it when courts ordered things like these results. So now we have the FBI visiting Vargas after her testimony about them using law enforcement or using databases off label without consent. But before that, we had STR, and they were trying to suppress the fact that their statistical match is not 1 in whatever it is. Now they're saying octillion because it's the S&P. At stake is the credibility of the compelling odds often cited in DNA cases, which can suggest an all but certain link between a suspect and a crime. When DNA from such clues as blood or skin cells match a suspect's genetic profile, that seals his fate with the jury, even in the absence of other evidence. As questions arise about the reliability of ballistic, bite mark, and even fingerprint analysis, genetic evidence has emerged as the forensic gold standard, portrayed often as unassailable. But DNA matches are not always what they appear to be. Although a person's genetic makeup is unique, his genetic profile, just a tiny sliver of the full genome, may not be. Siblings often share genetic markers at several locations, and even unrelated people share them by coincidence. No one knows precisely how rare this is. The odds presented in the court are the FBI's best estimates. The Arizona search was, in effect, the first test of those estimates in a large state database, and the results were surprising, even to some experts. Defense attorneys seized on the Arizona discoveries as evidence that genetic profiles match more than the official statistics imply and are far from unique, as the FBI has sometimes suggested. And now lawyers around the country are asking for searches of their own state databases. Scientists and legal experts want to evaluate these databases. Lawyers are also asking to search their own state databases. Several scientists and legal experts want to test the accuracy of official statistics using the 6 million profiles in CODIS. DNA is terrific, and nobody doubts it, but because it's so powerful, any chinks in its armor ought to be made as salient and clear as possible, so jurors will not be overwhelmed. And it's true, because that's what this is. It's overwhelming. You have to first be interested in it, and second, have some sort of ability to understand what you're reading when it gets to be more deep like this and scientific, right? Most jurors are not going to want to deal with it. I'm not saying not anyone, and you could get more jurors than not if you get lucky, but most of them are not going to dig this far into what is touch DNA, what's an STR, what's an SMP, what are the implications here. FBI officials argue that under their interpretation of federal law, use of CODIS is limited to criminal justice agencies. I mean, come on. What a power play. In their view, defense attorneys are allowed access about their specific cases, but not to the database in general, not even if they want to do a study to check the accuracy. So familiar. This happens in every realm of academia. Bureau officials say critics have exaggerated or misunderstood the implications of Troyer's discoveries. Indeed, experts generally agree that most, but not all, of the Arizona matches were to be expected statistically because of the unusual way Troyer searched for them. Okay, well, I'd like to know. I mean, those are the confounding variables, right? Well, what are they? In a typical criminal case, investigators look for matches to a specific profile, but the Arizona search looked for any matches among all the thousands of profiles in the database. I don't know if is that really different? I'd have to think on that again. As a result, Thomas Callahan, head of the FBI's CODIS unit, has dismissed Troyer's findings as misleading and meaningless. He urged authorities in several states to object to Arizona-style searches, advising them to tell courts that the probes could violate the privacy of convicted offenders. Oh, this is beautiful. Listen to this one. Thomas Callahan says that he doesn't want people doing these Arizona-style searches because probing this way violates the privacy of convicted offenders. Are you kidding me right now? But wait a second. You're not worried if you run an unknown through a genetic database that legally you're not supposed to, and all the private citizens who are not convicted of anything have their DNA looked at and tied to a suspect. That's honestly, this is like this is great to hear, because it's just the pure hypocrisy once again. Thomas doesn't want you searching Arizona style on the databases to conduct research. Anybody, if you don't like Troyer's research, have some people do it and replicate it and see, and maybe we'll find out it's more accurate than you thought. What's the problem? But no, he doesn't want them doing it, and he says, you know what, you're invading criminal offenders' privacy by doing that. See how that doesn't fare well for him? If he believes that, then he should also believe that they shouldn't be searching commercial genealogy databases in which people were not either opted in or expressly told it would be used. So don't send it here if you don't want it to be used. He's not worried about that privacy. Unbelievable. In one case, Callahan advised state officials to raise the risk of expulsion with a judge, but told the officials that expulsion was unlikely to actually happen, according to a record. It's unbelievable. In an interview with the Times, Callahan denied any effort to mislead the court. I'm sure he did. The FBI arguments have persuaded courts in California and other states to block the searches. I wonder if they do that in Idaho. Really be interested. If they do that in Idaho, then how is that not fair play? So essentially, prisoners, they're saying prisoners have more rights of privacy to their DNA, even though they're in a database because they've been convicted of a crime, then this is unbelievable. And then the general public, that's what they're saying right here. And some states have accepted this argument. Oh, this would be a perfect argument against the state to make if Idaho is one of the states that has barred people from doing Arizona-style searches. The FBI arguments, okay, persuaded. The resulting searches found nearly 1,000, okay. Two states objected, and judges overruled the objections, and so they were allowed. So the resulting searches found nearly 1,000 more pairs that matched at 9 or more loci. The resulting searches, I can appreciate why the FBI is worried about this, said David Kay, an expert on science and the law at Arizona State and former member of a national committee that studied forensic DNA. Here's another expert that would be great. But people's lives do ride on this evidence. It has to be explained. Thanks, Mr. K. I agree. So Troyer continued to be intrigued about all of this. Many states, so let's see, what did she do? At the time, many states looked at only 9 or fewer loci when searching for suspects. States now commonly attempt to compare 13, and they may be able to search for more in the future, but even now, in many cases, fewer than 13 loci are discernible from crime scene evidence because of contamination or because of degradation. So it's just making me think even more that just like STR in general isn't great. I'm curious how many loci would have matched from that original touch DNA with Brian's DNA. Because I'm sure that it's a SNP profile that they did for the buckle. Based on Troyer's results, she and her colleagues believe that a 9 locus match could point investigators to the wrong person. We felt it was interesting and just wanted people to understand it could happen. She declined interview initially, and then she discussed the findings by telephone with her bosses on the line. Yeah, 'cause she's probably scared that FBI was like coming after her before, just like with Vargas. If you're going to search at 9 loci, you need to be aware of what it means, said Todd Griffith. It's not necessarily absolutely the guy. Troyer made a simple poster for a national conference of DNA analysts. It showed photos of the white man and the younger black man next to their remarkably similar genetic profiles. Again, you can have different colors in families and things like that. It happens all the time. But are their genetic profiles going to be, they're going to be more, like, I would imagine it would have been an exact match and not like just a good enough match for CODIS, which is scary to begin with. I wonder if they've outlawed anything under like 11 loci or something. Probably not. Bruce Budlow, an FBI scientist, says that these matches were to be expected. He's an FBI scientist. 3 years later, Becca Barlow, a San Francisco defense attorney, came across a description of Troyer's poster on the internet. Its implications became clear as she prepared to defend a client accused of a 20-year-old rape and murder. A database search had found a 9 locus match between his DNA profile and semen found in the victim's body. Based on FBI estimates, the prosecutor said the odds of a coincidental match were as remote as 1 in 100 trillion. Now went up to 100 trillion. And don't we go to octillion with the S&P? It is more specific, though. Recalling the Arizona discovery, Barlow wondered if there might be similar coincidental matches in California's database, the world's third largest, with 360,000 DNA profiles at the time. Okay, so what this tells me is, because they have Becca Barlow, Ann already knows about this. She already knows about the barring of the database searches, and Ann already knows if Idaho has done that or not. And I don't think she's brought it up in argument. She may in the future, or it's possible that Idaho doesn't have that law. Troyer seemed eager to talk about her discovery, which still had her puzzled. Barlow recalled, the analyst told Barlow she had searched the growing Arizona database since the conference and found more pairs of profiles matching at 9 and even 10 loci. Encouraged, Barlow subpoenaed a new search of the Arizona database. Among about 65,000 felons, there were 122 pairs that matched at 9 of 13 loci. 20 pairs matched at 10 loci. 1 matched at 11 and 1 at 12, though both later proved to belong to relatives. Okay, so the 11 and 12, fine, but that's a lot. It's 122, 142 people out of 65,000 felons. It's not huge, but it's not 1 in 315 trillion. Barlow was stunned. At the time, such matches were almost unheard of. That same year, Fred Bieber, Justin's dad, just kidding, at Harvard, professor and expert in forensic DNA, tested in an unrelated criminal case that just once had he seen a pair of profiles matching at 9 of 13, and they belonged to brothers. He had heard of a 10 match between two men, but it was the result of incest. Amanda's father was his older brother. My gosh, I'm sorry. Indeed, since 2000, the FBI has treated certain rare DNA profiles as essentially unique. Other crime labs have adopted the policy, and some no longer tell jurors there is even a possibility of a coincidental match. That's messed up. That's exculpatory evidence. Come on. Soon after Barlow received the results, Callahan, the head of the FBI's DNA database unit, reprimanded Troyer's lab in Phoenix, saying it should have sought the permission of the FBI before complying with the court's order in the San Francisco case. Can you imagine that? She had an order from a case in San Francisco, the case she was trying. They said that she could search this database, and she did. And when she got the statistics back and they don't like what they found, the FBI got mad because she followed a court order. That's incredible. Asked later whether Callahan had threatened her lab, Troyer said in court, I wouldn't say it's been threatened, but we have been reminded. Well, that sounds ominous, right? Like how that's like, whoops. Sorry. I mean, let's just read that one more time, guys, because I'm just like, what? Hold on. She says, asked later whether Callahan had threatened her lab, Troyer said in court, I wouldn't say it's been threatened, but we have been reminded. Like, really? Okay. While we understand that the Arizona Department of Public Safety, acting in good faith, complied with a proper judicial court order in the release of the 9 loci search of your offender DNA records, this release of DNA data was not authorized. And he asked Arizona to take appropriate corrective action. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? This woman is accessing a database that was used to identify her client because she wants to know what the odds are that this isn't her client. And she already knows from past experience that it's not 1 in 315 trillion. Because just compared within a database of known criminals of 65,000, 142 of them were found to have more than 9 loci, which will get you arrested and convicted. And so she does this. The court said she can. She was given an order to. And then the FBI is requesting basically disciplinary action against this woman because of the DNA privacy of the convicted felons. But yet the FBI has no problem looking again at commercial databases of private citizens who are not in prison. Our privacy doesn't mean anything. They don't care. They don't want it to care. And there's no law settled on it yet. So they just want you to know it's okay. But don't look at the criminal database because we have to protect their privacy, which is really them just saying, you can't look at this because when you do your statistical analyses and peer-reviewed studies, you're going to find that this shit is not that accurate, not as accurate as we say it is. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is why, we have to pay attention to this stuff. This is why this case is really concerning. Dwight Adams, director of the FBI lab at the time, faxed Griffith, Troyer's boss, a letter saying that the Arizona State lab was under review. So now the state lab was being threatened. Holy shit. While we understand Arizona Department of Public Safety, acting in good faith, complied with a proper judicial court order in the release of the 9 loci search of your offender, this release of DNA data was not authorized. And he was asking the state to take appropriate corrective action against this Arizona State lab. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is all over CODIS. But it relates to what we're doing now, too. It was too late. After a judge found the Arizona results to be irrelevant in Barlow's case, the defense attorney emailed them to a network of her colleagues and DNA experts around the country. You go, girl. You go, Barlow. Soon, defense lawyers in other states were seeking what came to be known as Arizona searches. Don't panic. For years, DNA's strength in the courtroom has been the brute power of its numbers. It's hard to argue with odds like 1 in 100 billion or octillion. And it's even more, isn't it like 1.28 octillion or some bullshit? Troyer's discovery threatened to turn the tables on prosecutors. Oh no, can't have that. At first blush, the Arizona matches appeared to contradict those statistics and the popular notion that these DNA profiles were unique. Law enforcement experts scrambled to explain. 3 months after the court-ordered search in Arizona, Stephen Myers, a senior DNA analyst, gave a presentation. Oh, and he's an analyst for guess who? Department of Justice. Can we guess what he's going to say? Gave a presentation to the Association of California Crime Lab Analysis. It was titled, Don't Panic, a hint at the alarm Troyer's discovery had set off. He said many of these matches were predictable, given the way that she searched it. In a database search for a criminal case, a crime scene sample would have been compared to every profile in the database. Okay. But Troyer compared all 65,000 to each other, resulting in about 2 billion comparisons. Okay. This is interesting. This kind of makes sense. Each comparison made it more likely she would find a match. But if they're unique, why I don't think that's right. I have to pull out a statistic book for this one. When this database quote effect was considered, about 100 of the 144 matches Troyer had found were to be expected statistically. You know what though? You know what? When we're talking about 65,000, the difference of 44 matches could be a high enough P. It could be statistically significant, that difference there, because you said 100 were expected and she found 144. So that's 44 more, almost half more. That's a lot more. Troyer search also looked for matches at any of the 13 loci, while in a real criminal case, the analysts would look for a particular profile. Further, any non-matching markers would immediately rule out a suspect. In the case of the black and white men who matched, the 4 loci that different, if available, would have, if available. See, that's the thing, if available, but you're talking about degraded crime scene evidence. So you're already at a loss. And if they're not available, you're just shit out of luck. You could just end up getting matched to somebody that you're not related to, and now you're a suspect. Or you hit on something. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense. I understand their point, but this is what they mean by statistics. All statistics are what? Lies or damn lies, something like that. You can sway a statistic any which way you want to, but just logically, and look, logically speaking, I believe we all have very unique DNA profiles, but we do share certain things. And apparently certain things that you share in common with someone else get checked off, and that makes you likely related. But then if you have, say, 2 other things that are like this and this, then that could just rule you out, even though you have the 9 loci, right? And that's fine. But the problem is when they're looking in these databases and when they are matching them, a lot of these DNA samples are degraded and they don't have the other loci to rule them out. And so now what do you do? If you can't account for that, that's too much error. That's too much error, I believe. It's not that you shouldn't be allowed to do it, because clearly it's beneficial in most cases. But I believe that a jury should understand that there is a small amount of error with this. And so it's just one more piece to consider in a criminal circumstantial investigation, along with the phone, along with the car, the DNA. It's not right now in a lot of courtrooms, it's like nothing else can be there, not even a motive. They don't need one to convict, but they could have a pretty good alibi. They could have choppy evidence that puts them at the scene. And everything else aside, the only other evidence they have is your touch DNA on a snap of a sheath at a crime scene. And people will convict based on that because they put so much weight on DNA. But if they were told that, hey, look, I don't think you get in the weeds with people, but it's kind of like informed consent if you're prescribing a medicine. I don't think it's fair to not let jurors know that, yes, this is very accurate, but it's like whatever. It's not, let's face it, it's not 1 in 114 billion. And I'm just talking about CODIS right now. We're not talking about STR, which is more specific and probably has a lot less error. The problem is when you start with an STR and then you match it, like I want to know how many loci, I'm just so curious how much of this DNA they had to work with. And how, I mean, we found this cold case, they were able to pull up DNA from 30 years ago or something. So, you know, you have to give that some weight, I think. I think it's something you need to give some weight, but it is the privacy issue is a concern. Further, any non-matching markers would rule them out. Okay, the presence of relatives in the database could also count. Okay, we know that. And they said, oh, that it would require cumbersome research. Okay, well, we're talking about somebody's life, right? Some scientists are not satisfied by those explanations. I'm not. They wonder whether Troyer's findings signal flaws in a complex assumption that underlie the FBI's rarity estimates. In the 1990s, FBI scientists estimated the rarity of each genetic marker by extrapolating from sample populations of a few hundred people. That's it. That's how long ago they came up with that. The estimates for each marker are multiplied across all 13 loci to come up with a rarity estimate for the entire profile. You know what's crazy about it? If you're in any genetic database, you know this. Every once in a while, you check your genealogy and your percentages change. You're a little less this, you're a little more that. This happens. I remember when it happened a few years back, and all the Italians were in uproar because, we Italians can be proud people. And everybody who had Italian genetics suddenly were less Italian by some percentage. And people were pissed. The people who are Italian were pissed. Like it could have been 40% and it went down to like 28 or something. People were getting mad. I don't know if it happened to other ethnicities, but it definitely happened to Italians, and they were the only ones that got mad about it if it did. But then over time, it starts to fluctuate again, and the Italian heritage went up, and then other things pop up, right? It's not going to be anything radical. It's not going to show something that you didn't have before, but your percentages can go up and down by like 20%. And the reason this happens is because the larger the N, like if you've ever done research, N equals the number of test subjects, right? And so the larger number of patrons uploading their DNA all over the world to an ancestry.com, the more accurate and refined the DNA profiles become, because they see the distinctions and then regroup them and arrange them. And so it's there, I don't know what number becomes like enough, right? But right now I think they have like 75 million. That's a good enough N, I think, for most people. But yet it still changes. So it just shows you how complex this subject is. And I am not a geneticist or biologist or any of this stuff, but I do find it fascinating. I'm trying to educate myself on it. I thought I'd share it with you guys and see what you think. So a statistician at University of Washington, interesting, who has studied the issue, said these assumptions should be tested empirically in the national database system. Yes, voice of reason. Instead of saying we predict there will be a match, let's open it up and look. Some experts predict that given the rapid growth of CODIS, such a search would produce one or more examples of unrelated people who are identical at all 13 loci. Such a discovery was once unimaginable. So now they're admitting to it. This is how it starts. This is how the gaslighting starts. And then eventually they just tell you, yeah, it isn't 1 in 114 billion. And by then nobody cares anymore, because we're slowly boiling in the water. We're not noticing it's getting warmer. In January 2006, not long after Barlow distributed the results of the court-ordered search, FBI sent out a nationwide alert to crime labs, warning of similar defense requests. Holy shit. Soon after, the Bureau's arguments against the searches were being made in courtrooms around the country. And once again, we have a Department of Justice official saying this could have dire consequences, violating the privacy of convicted offenders. Maybe we should ask Mr. Chamberlain from the Department of Justice to come in and talk about how he believes that searching these databases for research purposes would be violating the privacy of convicted offenders, and how that compares to the Department of Justice allowing the FBI to search genetic databases that are commercial, that private people have put their what about our privacy, Mr. Chamberlain? How does that differ from convicted felons? Oh, I know the difference. Because it works in your favor. One works in your favor, the other works against it. One gives the federal government more power. The other allows people to retain rights. That's the difference. This started in 2008 and probably before then. Illinois and Maryland courts ordered the searches to proceed despite opposition from the FBI and state officials at every turn. You go, Illinois and Maryland. In July 2006, after Chicago area defense attorneys sought a search, the FBI's Callahan held a telephone conference with Illinois crime lab officials, these MFers. The topic was, quote, how to fight this, according to lab officials. Callahan suggested they tell the judge that Illinois could be disconnected from the national database system. Can you imagine this? That's how worried they are about an empirical study on the analyses they use to convict criminals, even put them to death in some cases. Why are you hiding, bro? What are you hiding, bro? But then in an interview, Callahan disputed that he ever said that. I didn't say it was unlikely to happen. I was asked specifically, what's the likelihood here? I said, I don't know, but it takes a lot for a state to be cut off. A week later, the judge ordered the search. Lawyers for the lab then took the matter to the Illinois Supreme Court, arguing in part that Illinois could lose its access to holy shit federal DNA database. The high court refused to block the search. This judge has some balls. I really, really want to know who this judge is. The result, 903 pairs of profiles matching at 9 or more loci in a database of about 220,000. That's a lot. State officials obtained a court order to prevent distribution of the results. The Times obtained them from a scientist who worked closely with the FBI. A similar fight occurred in a death penalty case in Maryland. The prosecutor saw a DNA match between a baseball cap dropped at the crime scene and the suspect as so definitive that he didn't plan to tell the jury about the chance of a coincidental match. That's crazy. This we think Koberger got it bad. This dude dropped a baseball cap near the crime scene. Shit. Seeking to cast doubt on the evidence, the defense persuaded the judge to order an Arizona search. The state did not comply. The defense filed contempt of court. Michelle Groves, the state's DNA administrator, argued in court in an affidavit that based on conversations with Callahan, she believed it would be possibly illegal and burdensome. According to Groves, Callahan had told her that complying with the court order could lead Maryland to be disconnected from CODIS. Again, FBI, DOJ, threatening state labs to be disconnected from CODIS because you're not allowed to look. Groves' affidavit was edited by FBI officials and the technology contractor that designed CODIS. Before submitting the affidavit, Groves wrote the group an email saying, let's see if this will work, the records show. The court will not accept the notion that the extent of a person's due process rights hinges solely on whether some employee of the FBI chooses to authorize the use of the database. This judge is awesome. The court will not accept the notion that the extent of a person's due process rights hinges solely on whether some employee of the FBI chooses to authorize the use of the database. The search went ahead in January 2007. The system did not go down, nor was Maryland expelled, shocking, from the national database system. In a database of fewer than 30,000 profiles, 32 pairs matched at 9 loci. 3 of those pairs were perfect matches, identical at 13 out of 13. That's terrifying. Experts say they most likely are duplicates or belong to identical twins or brothers. It's also possible that one of the matches is between unrelated people, defying odds as remote as 1 in 1 quadrillion. Come on, guys. There's something you're not taking into account here. Maryland officials never did research to find out. That's too bad. So as these databases grow, so do the chances of finding a coincidental match. 3 states we were able to find. So in Maryland, 33 matches in a database of 20,000, 144 matches in a database of 65,000 in Arizona, and 903 matches in a database of 230,000. So apparently CODIS had, at this point, when they released this article in 2008, 6 million DNA profiles. It's never been searched for coincidental matches. And guess what? It never will, right? So here's an interesting way to look at this. It's called the birthday paradox. Hold on, let me just take this guy off the screen. It's called the birthday paradox. Experts use an analogy called the birthday paradox to explain that the way you search for a DNA profile can dramatically affect your chances of finding a match. In some circumstances, matches are far more likely than many people may think. Imagine you're at a party with 99 other guests. If you randomly pull aside one of them, the odds that he or she will share your birthday, share your day and month of birth are 1 in 365. Okay. But the probability that anyone at that party shares your birthday is far higher, about 1 in 4. Are you kidding me? If I just pull a random person out of 100, out of 99 people, the likelihood that that person would be born on my birthday, the day and month, is 1 in 365. That makes sense. It's just based on the number of days in a year. But the probability that anyone, now I'm comparing myself to all of them, that probability is 1 in 4. So next time you're around 99 people, shout out your birthday and see how many people share your exact birthday. Not the year, just the day and the month. So that's a lot. They're saying 25% of the 99 people are going to share the day and the month of your birthday. That's a lot. That's like 24 people out of the 99, something like that. When you compare your birthday with 99 other people's, each comparison makes a match more likely. Multiply the odds of 1 divided by 365 by 99. That's how they got that probability. Okay. So now I see what they're saying. So for the same reason, the odds that anyone at the party shares a birthday with anyone else are higher still. In fact, it's almost a certainty. As everyone looked for a match with everyone else, they made 4,950 comparisons. The math, multiply 100 people by the 99 other guests, comparing themselves, divide by 2, because people who compare with each other count as a single comparison. And that's how they get the match. For the same reason, the odds that anyone at the party shares a birthday with anyone else are higher still. How many people need to be at the party for it to be likely that 2 guests share a birthday? The answer may surprise you. Just 23. Yeah, because I thought it was 24. How many people need to be? So if you have 23 people at a party, they're saying the odds are likely that 2 of those people will share the same birthday. That seems really crazy, right? So basically what they're saying is when law enforcement puts the DNA, the STR, into CODIS, they're comparing that one person against the 7 million that they have in there, that one person against the 7 million. But when people are doing these Arizona-like searches, they're comparing the people to each other. Therefore, it doubles the amount of it's not the subjects, but the comparisons. It increases because people are all getting compared to each other, right? You have to multiply that out. It was a pretty high number, they said. And so when that happens, the likelihood that you're going to find a match is a lot higher. Now, here's my problem with that argument. I understand what they're saying. And with the birthday thing, it's really interesting. Like, super interesting. But a birthday is still, whatever your birthday may be, it's still the odds of 1 out of 365, right? What is your DNA likelihood? Isn't that like, what's the population of the planet now? 350 million or something? 1 in 350 million. So it's a lot more rare to share a birthday. To share DNA with someone than it is to share a birthday with someone. I understand what they're saying. And this is how statistics lie, because it makes it really easy to understand. They're making an analogy, really, but I don't think it's a scientifically valid analogy, because you're starting with the assumption that one person has the odds of 1 out of 365 to have any date of the year be their birthday. And that's it. You can't go beyond that. But one person's DNA isn't 1 out of 365. It's 1 out of, like I said, like 350 billion or whatever it is right now. So it's not fair, and it's not a good comparison. And even though I didn't really get into the STR, going to the SNP part of it, I think this was important to go through and understand. And it's helpful to know that somebody like Bick Barlow, who's been pioneering these rights for quite a while, and who has been threatened by the FBI, just like Vargas was allegedly threatened, that she knows about this fight. She knows what this is. And that means Ann knows what this is. And that means Mazoth. It means that his team knows what this fight is about. They're aware of it. They're aware of this case. They're aware if Idaho State has or doesn't have access to research state databases. My guess is they don't have access to it, which if they don't, it's either they don't or it hasn't been challenged. I don't know. Idaho, I had the impression before, was a very right-leaning state, so very like libertarian-minded, which you would think means that the police are not fascists. The government isn't behaving in a fascist way. So it's really a lot to think about. I'm sure they don't have statistics on how accurate SMP and SNP profiles are. The assumption would be that they're much more accurate because they are they're seeing a lot more of a unique pattern in DNA. And as much as we can say the DNA on the snap is touch DNA and it was degraded, we're hearing this guy, David Middleman, talk about getting DNA from like a bone that was found outside 30 years later. And they were able to match the person. So it seems like it's a pretty accurate method, but that still doesn't address the Fourth Amendment issue. So the Fourth Amendment issue is at the heart of the case. Everybody kind of knows that at this point. Everybody kind of agrees this could go to the Supreme Court if he's convicted. But I was thinking about it, right? Because the judge says to her, are you implying Mr. Koberger uploaded his DNA into one of these databases? And I don't think she really answers, because I think she says, we don't really know because we haven't seen any of the work. And whether or not her client told her he did or not is beside the fact. The rumors were out there because the neighbor said it. But other than that, I never saw it anywhere else. And she's not confirming it. So assuming that, well, first, if his DNA is in there, then it's going to be a more clear-cut answer and an easier decision, I would think, for the judge to make, although I don't know if it's precedent, that his Fourth Amendment was violated, right? Because it's his DNA that he uploaded willingly into a commercial database that was then utilized later to convict him, or at least prosecute him. But the judge's question was, so if it's not his, are you telling me that he has the right to claim infringement of his relatives' rights of privacy and protection? And Anne was like, no, that's not what I'm saying, right? But here's the thing. So there's no laws against it. There's policies about it, but people break policies all the time. And if you're in the FBI, it doesn't even get you reprimanded or fired. If you're at a state lab, you might get fired or your lab closed down if you try to do something like research. But regardless, so they have these profiles, and my argument would be about the intent, right? Like when I think of this, I think about intent. So the intention when a private citizen wants to get their wife or girlfriend a DNA kit for Valentine's Day is to give them the gift. You know, this is the commercial, right? This is the gift of your ancestry. Find your roots, find your connections. Don't feel so alone in this world, right? And it is fascinating to find some of these things out, right? Sometimes you find things out that maybe you didn't know that you should know, and it's kind of shocking. They've got a whole group of people like that online that find out their mom or that their dad isn't really their dad, or some people have found out they've been related to each other and they're married. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. But secrets, secrets. So this shit comes out. That's a disclaimer everybody should have to be told before they do a DNA test. But regardless, right? So we know we have these DNA databases out there. But so you're just a consumer. You decide, or you get it as a gift, and you send your DNA in, and the place you send it into doesn't force you to choose between opting in or opting out of allowing your DNA to be used for research purposes and for law enforcement purposes and for missing person purposes, right? Now they do this with some of the DNA databases, but before you were automatically opted in, okay, is what we heard from Vargas, and I believe it. And then some legal trouble came along. I'm sure it was raised in the courts and we could find it. And then they were basically forced to say, okay, we're going to let people know, like, do you want to opt in or opt out? And in fact, I've seen that on ancestry.com. You can opt in or opt out. I don't know what they do automatically, but I think now a lot of them are switching to automatically opt out. So you have to choose to opt in to let your DNA be utilized for such and such purposes. And a lot of people will do that because you feel good doing it, right? Oh, I'm helping research for medical diseases or cures. I'm helping them identify a missing victim. I'm helping law enforcement investigate, giving them leads, right? You want to be good, right? Like Richard Allen wanted to be good when he said, yeah, I was at the bridge at this time. This is what I saw. I just wanted to let you know because you were asking for tips, right? But what happens when you do that? What's the moral of the story? One day then you get a call and someone says to you, listen, you opted in on this and we want to ask you some questions. Do you know this person? Are you related to this person? Oh, you're their third cousin. When's the last time you saw them? What do you know about them? What do you know about their childhood? Have they ever been arrested before? Have they ever had any mental problems? And you're like, what? Why are you asking me this? We're going to come over and interview you. We need to ask you some questions. I mean, this is how it happens. Are you shitting yourself at that point? I would be. Like, what the hell did I do? And then you find out your third or fourth cousin has just been arrested based on your DNA sample because it connects him to the murder of 4 students. And they thank you for that. And they want to know if you'll testify at trial. And you don't want any part of it, right? You don't know this person. You're scared now. What the hell did I do? But you didn't even know. You didn't even know that that was a possibility, because they should make you sign something before you pay to agree or disagree with it. Or maybe you did know. You wanted to be a good Samaritan and you opted in. And now, because of your DNA sample, this person may be convicted and put to death, right? But there's no other evidence tying him there. I mean, look, I'm just playing it on both sides, is what I'm trying to say. All I'm saying is, what people should have, when you send in your DNA to one of these commercial places, okay, your intent is to find out what the commercial said, your ethnicity. You want to get your Irish on, or whatever it is your ethnicity is, right? You want to know. That's your intention. The intent is for self-knowledge, family knowledge. The intent is not to help the police develop leads. That's not what the intent is here. Now, GEDmatch has a system called Genetic Witness. That's the intent there. And I think if people want to do that, they should do it. Look, people have free will to do whatever they'd like, but they should at least be informed. And so when you have these databases that the intent is to, like I said, look, 23andMe or any of these companies, did they ever advertise? They're showing you the islands, and they're showing you Irish people doing a jig, and they're showing you these beautiful African women with, these beautiful dresses and things. Find your heritage, connect with lost relatives. Do they ever say, help us convict a relative, help us find leads for a murder? Did they develop a separate commercial for that? No, they don't. So the intention for these DNA samples is not to be utilized for law enforcement. So the argument by the state was, well, I argue that they don't have, this is so crazy to me. I argue that when a person puts their DNA into a commercial database, that the purpose to do that is to find relatives. So obviously what they know, that they don't have privacy. They're trying to find people. Well, here's the difference. When you put your DNA into a database, you do find relatives. You have an option to connect or not connect. You could just look around or whatever. And your relative will see that they might be related to you. But they're not getting a copy of your DNA. Like, all my relatives on Ancestry don't have a copy of my specific DNA. And they can't look and see certain things on my family tree because I make it private. See, so no, you're wrong, state prosecutor. You're wrong. I have very good idea of the rights and privacy of the DNA because I opted out of research in LE and all that stuff. And I did this stupid DNA test like a long time ago before my third eye opened. So it's there, and that's just the way it is. But I opted out of that. I saw that and I opted out of it. And so, and my intention for doing the DNA test was to explore my heritage and my ethnicity and my ancestry. My intention was specifically not to help law enforcement develop leads, medical research, or find missing people. And that may sound selfish, but that's just the truth, because I think privacy sometimes is something, especially now, that we have to be really careful with. And so your assumption or your assertion that people who upload their DNA into a public DNA database don't have any expectation of privacy is simply not true, because once again, you're comparing two separate things. You're comparing my ability to share my matches with all these people, but they are not getting an actual copy of my personal DNA results. And in fact, I can destroy my DNA results. I can save them on my own and own them and take them out of Ancestry. Curious if they ever really go out, if you know what I mean. So no, I have very specific rights in mind when I did that DNA test, even before my third eye opened. So you are 100% wrong here, and your argument is wrong. And so the reason why I think that it's a problem, and I don't know what the answer is, but that there are probably millions of people that have uploaded their DNA and don't even know that they could have opted in or opted out, or don't even know what we're talking about because they're not paying attention. Not because they're stupid, but because their life is full with so many other things, like all of our lives are. So the argument is poor on both ends. And the fact that this guy is saying this, that this Nye is arguing that the public has no right to privacy when they upload their DNA into a third-party database. That's what he's saying. But if you remember, Chamberlain of the FBI stated that you can't look in CODIS and run any searches or research because you would be violating the privacy of convicted felons. And we know what he really means is, we don't want you to check our work because it's really not as good as we say it is. I'm not saying it's shit. I'm just saying it's not as good. And that's also reasonable doubt. And this stuff is complicated. You have to be interested in it. And so what's a jury going to do? And this is the problem. And so I know that the judge is, not going to be able to deal with that Fourth Amendment issue unless Brian Koberger's DNA was used. But even that gets confusing for me. And I'm going to come back with a different, some more on this. But I just wanted to say, I'm just trying to figure out the timeline here. From what I can gather, it's the AT&T warrant. We went through some of that stuff. But the other thing is, if BK's DNA, it seems as if SMP profiles are relatively accurate, but even with those, it says there's like a 5% error rate. That's a big rate. What does that translate to in numbers? I don't think it's 1 in 1.28 octillion or whatever. Do you? 5%? No. I mean, it doesn't, it just like 5%. So like, I'd have to write it down. I can't do it in my head. Regardless, there's error rate. And the fact that they won't even admit it, that they did this, which it's obvious that's what happened at the FBI. They don't want to admit it because then we're going to make news, and it's going to happen what happened with the Arizona searches. Everybody's going to start talking about it. Now, a lot of this stuff has already kind of come out since this case started, but I think it'll be a different story when somebody is, potentially going to be, put to death. And it might be more concerning. It's hard. It's hard because, law enforcement in this case, like I really don't, the talent, they've had some bad things happen. We know about Stickergate. We know that they planted evidence. They lied about evidence. So they're capable of this. But most of those people have been fired at this point. I think it's possible that there are some bad eggs left over. And that's why they've had high turnover rate there. And that this case is just exposing that. But I don't think all law enforcement is bad, obviously. And I don't think all law enforcement in this case is bad. And I just, if it's Brian Koberger's DNA, one question is it a relative, right? Because look, I can say there's no other evidence against him. It doesn't seem like there is. The eyewitnesses, I want to say this, I was really infuriated when I found that out. And I, kind of talked about they should be grilled and stuff. But it's always hard for me because I just always try to see the other side. And it's just like, I don't know enough about it, to be honest, to be like, these girls better come back. Just logically speaking, it seems outrageous that they don't want to come back and testify. Logically speaking, it seems strange that they didn't call for so many hours that they're making these contradictory statements. But at the end of the day, like, I wasn't there, and it's very possible that maybe they were just incredibly traumatized, that they weren't even high. They were just so traumatized by what they saw. I mean, it took a month for them to do the autopsy results on Ethan's body. Was it that unidentifiable? Or what were they looking at? Because it, from the PCA, which, okay, it doesn't really mean much, but there were different weapons used. One's a blunt object, one's a sharp object, one's an edge weapon, you know. A month, I mean, that's a long time. I know murder investigations, it can do that, but like, I don't think any of the other victims took that long. He had to be sent to a special place for his autopsy. It just makes you wonder, right? So imagine seeing something like that in your house, like helter skelter, and find out that, like, you know, this is what you were hiding from. Your worst fears came true. You know, I'm just saying, if that comes out, like, I'll feel bad that I'm sitting here saying they should be grilled, but I still have to go back to, you know what? The problem isn't really them as much as the police and what they have said and not said. And, you know, the police haven't made any statements defending them. The police are the ones that caused the confusion in the beginning, them not being witnesses. Now they're witnesses. They're survivors, they're victims. The police is the one that did that to them. And it has invited public scrutiny upon them. And it's hard to not look at some of the things. So I just want to say that about them. And then lastly, because I'm rambling now, but lastly, I just want to show you this interview from Captain Roger Lanier, another person who has transferred, even though he just transferred to Moscow the year or two before, he transferred back out of there. Then we have Corporal Dean transferred to the sheriff's office. We have the judge who just flat out retires. And there are probably 3 other people in Moscow Police Department from that year that either retired, quit, or transferred out. That people are jumping ship, right? They're jumping ship. And it's strange, you know? It's strange. So anyway, the reason I thought this was interesting is, let me pull this up here. This interview was given on December 13th, the same day that they met with Kaylee Gonzalez's parents, the same day she later said she was told by someone this would 100% be solved, the same day she said his name was swirling around. That day is when Captain Roger Lanier, who no longer is there, gave this interview. And so have a look at this guy and tell me what you see. Is this like a man who is honest and concerned, or is this guy being deceptive? Let's see what we think.
Talk about the first time you heard about what happened. How did you react? What were your first steps as an investigator?
Yeah, well, it was hard. I got called at home. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and it took me a second. I really had to think about what I had just heard. 4 murders in Moscow, Idaho is so out of character. And at the time, they were fairly certain it was college students, and it was near the campus, and that area is kind of a campus community. So once I got over the initial shock, I knew that I was coming to the station. So I drove in, and everybody just kind of fell into a role. That was a all hands on deck moment Sunday afternoon. It became fairly apparent when I got to the scene that we were going to need resources outside of just what the Moscow Police Department could provide. And we have a very, very good working relationship with the Idaho State Police. We knew what their capabilities were, and so that was the first call that we made to have their investigative team come up and help us process the scene. The scene wasn't chaos, you know, the neighborhood, but it was very, very somber. Like I said, that is a community of college students that live over there. Many of them, through word of mouth, knew what had happened. They were standing outside. There was a lot of crying. There were friends trying to find out who exactly was inside the house. some family members that arrived on scene. It was incredibly hard for the community, but it was also really, really hard on our officers, some of whom were very young, and that was the first real major crime scene that they had encountered. So emotionally, it was a very, very draining day. But resources came, and then the first about.
So I just want to bring this up because, I've criticized so much about Moscow PD and these agencies and things. And I want to bring this up because I don't think this is acknowledged, right? Like, not every single person on Moscow Police Department, and I'm not saying anybody said this. I'm just saying this for myself because I don't think I've ever said it. Not every single person on Moscow Police Department is evil. Not every single person is corrupt. Not every single person knows all the inside details of this case. And we don't really know for sure if we have suspicions about certain things because of what we've seen, especially the Banfield stuff, right? But like, we don't know at the end of the day, truly. Nobody knows if any of these people were somehow involved in planting evidence, causing problems, or anything like that. Of course, any of that is possible, and people have discussed these things. I probably discussed some of these things as a theory. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that worked on this case. And this guy, I honestly think, is just being genuine. And he may, in fact, even be the one that they didn't want to name that gave them the information and said, I promise you this will 100% be solved. And you'll hear the rest of the interview in a second. But when he talked about many of the young officers showing up at the scene and how it affected them, it's not something I had thought about. And I feel badly that I didn't, because I think that's something that needs to be talked about. These officers, a lot of them are new, maybe just started, weren't part of the corruption with Stickergate, just want to work in a college town doing their thing, helping people. And then they see this. Anybody who saw anything like what was there, we can only imagine, would be heavily traumatized. Some people end up in a psych ward after that shit. They come out, but it takes them a while, right? So I just want to give recognition to those people, those officers, and recognize that there are good people there, even though I scrutinize, I'll just speak for myself, quite a bit on this stuff. I don't have any facts in any of these law enforcement did anything wrong. I find things suspicious. I'm questioning them. I think that's fair to do. But on the flip side, I also want to recognize that a lot of these people were just doing their job, and this fucking happened. So let me just play the rest of this video here. Watch out when he's putting his head over here. Okay. All right, let me just finish that video here.
And the FBI, the Idaho State.
I just want to. Okay.
System that worked for everybody. The FBI got involved almost immediately. And the FBI, the Idaho State Police, and the Moscow Police Department all have a little bit different way of doing things. And that's okay. But when you're working collectively, you have to put a system in place that starts information flowing and you can handle it in a logical manner. So fortunately, the FBI has some experience in those areas, and they were very, very good at helping us set up their virtual command post. And then once everything was in place, it became a very, very systematic method of processing the information that was coming in. Yeah, a lot of emotional highs and lows.
So, I mean, he just talked about all of the different agencies that came in to help them, like swooped in right away. And they took their help. We didn't hear about them fighting the FBI coming in, right? Like Delphi, where like FBI has information, they don't want to hear about it. Like in Karen Reed, where FBI is not sharing information, or at least there's not an open communication between, you know, a federal investigation and the local. In this case, the federal agencies and other state agencies that came to help them were welcomed in, and they worked as a team. Everybody was working as a team. And this kind of brings me back to, well, why did it happen in this case? What's going on here? It brings me back to it being a federal investigation to begin with, and less of a Moscow Police Department is trying to set up the outsider. More like, what's the federal government doing here? Because we just saw who's capable of threatening, right? Now, we also have a police department that during the COVID years was sued by the church because they didn't want to wear masks. They were arrested. False evidence was planted. They had to admit it. I mean, it's crazy, right? It's the same Moscow Police Department, but it's not the same people. Although I do think a couple of them were still there. Like, I don't want to say the names, but there were a couple of those people left over here. So we know they're capable of corruption. Are they capable of planting something to frame another person? And if they did that, do they want to invite the FBI in so the FBI can figure it out? Because they would probably figure it out. Okay, so if it wasn't Moscow police, was it the FBI that did it? Did they plant something? Like, who planted this evidence and why is my question. If we're going to make the assumption that this was planted evidence. And that doesn't have to be the assumption. The assumption could also be that even though his buccal swab matched to the SNP profile that Othram developed, right? Even though they matched, right? What does that really mean if the processes leading up to that, how did they get there, right? Because it could have been incorrect. Like, I guess it's the odds, right? And when they say 1 in whatever octillion, it's like, I can't even imagine that, and it doesn't even sound real. Whatever you're talking about sounds fake. You need to present it in a more relatable manner, because that just sounds unfathomable. So it probably is just a simple statistic that I'm sure if I sat down, I'd figure it out. But you still need to know the processes, and they're not showing it. They're not showing it because they don't want the public to know that they're using this shit for law enforcement leads, and they've been doing it, and they're doing it right as we speak. And many times maybe they don't get caught because it's like not as big of a case, and they've got a defense attorney who doesn't care. Not that they don't care, but they're overworked and they don't have time to argue about this. It's your DNA, buddy. Let's play, right? But
an incredible amount of teamwork. The general public doesn't have any idea the scope of this investigation, the number of people that are involved, not just here in Moscow, but investigative and interview teams in the northern part of Idaho, the southern part of Idaho, the eastern part of Idaho, resources from the Salt Lake City FBI office.
All those people, they were utilizing resources from all different sections of Idaho, Utah, and I think he's even going to say Washington. Hold on.
The Coeur d'Alene FBI office, analysts back in Virginia.
So it just goes back to that whole drug task force. And again, wild speculation theory here, wild speculation that there was some sort of surveillance being done of either Brian Koberger before all this even happened. I know it's not in the paperwork, but maybe it's in a sealed federal grand jury paperwork. I'm not sure, right? We know there were 71 subpoenas for the federal grand jury. Will we ever see this? But regardless, what if, because all the drug busts we talked, and this gets back to Pav's theory then, right? So you've got law enforcement agencies from all over the state and Utah, probably like the main hub in that area, maybe, I don't know. And, or is their drug task force connected to that somehow? And then you have, even in Virginia, And I understand the FBI helps out. They want to help solve unsolved cases, right? But, and now I'm going to compare it to a movie, which I know is ridiculous, but I'm just spitballing once again. Stay with me for a second. If you see any of these movies where this crazy murder happens, right? Let's take True Detective, for example. The one that eerily kind of reminds me of Delphi, right? I'm not the only one that thinks that. Anyway, True Detective, they show up to a scene where this like ritual murder was performed and it's just awful. And so, you know, the FBI comes and they're helping investigate. But is the FBI coming from like all over the state? And is the FBI coming from another state too? And is the, you know, the analysts in Virginia, are they on this too? I mean, the movies, that's not usually how it happens. It's usually like one or two FBI agents that are there to just kind of like help you out on the federal level, I guess. But like, are they coming from that many different agencies together into your town? It never happens in the movies, not at least not that I've seen. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen in real life. I'm just curious though, if anybody knows. It just seems like if all these agencies from different states and all over their state are coming, setting up a command center, running through tips. First of all, if they do that for every murder case, that's so awesome, because I think that's the way things should work. But if they don't, then why would it happen here? And it just goes back to it being like surveillance beforehand, people being looked at beforehand. What do you guys think?
And the number of people that have flown here or driven here from great distances to just lend their specialty to this investigation. We have the FBI's command post in our parking lot, and we've hooked them up to Wi-Fi, and everything that they would normally do down in Salt Lake City, they're doing right here in our parking lot. So the team effort has been amazing. It's been overwhelming at times, but there are so many people with so much expertise. Somebody always steps up and takes the role that needs to be filled.
What role has speculation, rumors, and the conversations on social media play in the investigation?
Yeah, that has been by far the most frustrating part of this. We've always closely guarded the information that we've discovered at the scene and our investigative information, because we want to protect the integrity of this investigation. And just look at social media and the rumors that fly out there.
No, he's going to say something here that I needed to hear, that I needed to be reminded of. First, though, I want to say that I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this guy is earnest. Like he's telling us the truth. I don't get the sense that this man is hiding anything, and that he's genuinely like sad for the younger officers that had to endure what they saw. I'm sure he's still traumatized at some level by it. And he seems really happy that there's teamwork happening. He just seems authentic. And so I don't get any of the vibes I get from, say, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the other guy's name, but you guys know who I'm talking about. The one who did the press conferences, who was bright red and stuttering and stuff. And he doesn't strike me as a guy that's not confident. So he, unfortunately for him, he came off like he was hiding like a bunch of stuff. And that could just be he was hiding details that he knew that he couldn't share. But it's interesting that that makes him feel that uncomfortable. Some people just don't like to lie. But you know, I've seen officers get up there and say, look, this is all we're telling you. We're not telling you anything more. Anything you've heard, you can't verify unless you hear it through us. And I can't give any more information. That's the end of it. I mean, I've seen them do that stuff, and people take it because they're like, okay, protect the integrity. But he was up there like almost apologizing, explaining, getting irritated, getting frustrated. It was just a very odd scene. Is that just because it's a little town and they didn't expect it?
A small piece of information that has speculation added to it just takes its own life on the internet and starts rumors. And then we find ourselves not only tracking those rumors down and trying to quell them, but also we see our tips that come in are geared more toward the rumor, not the facts that have been put out. And the really unfortunate part of it is the effect that it's had on the victims' families, on the college students and friends of the victims, some of whom have had death threats.
Right. And I believe this wholeheartedly. And then this is why when I first started making videos, other than the Linda Lane, the other thing I wanted to start share is how I had debunked some of these rumors that had been going around at the time. And I think the first video I did, which actually got probably the most views on my channel, was the one about Jack Showalter and how like the hoodie guy has been ruled out and all these things about him going to Africa and him, you know, all these other things, right? They were just untrue. And I'm not saying I know for a fact that he's innocent of things. I'm just saying like the rumors were able to be disproven. And he got a lot of harassment, right? He got a lot of harassment for all kinds of reasons. I get it. We latched onto him, mainstream latched onto him. And it does seem like whatever was happening with that other guy, Joe Vidot, I think, who came on, who was kind of strange. I mean, I hate to say all these people seem sketchy. I don't think everybody in the world is sketchy. You know, I really don't. That's why I only talk about cases like this that interest me. I see tons of cases that I follow that people are, I think they're guilty. They get determined guilty. I don't see anything that was done illegally, anything crazy, right? I don't talk about those. They're not quite as interesting because the mystery's been solved. The justice has been served. But these cases, you know, when you see all these sketchy things, it's hard to not wonder what is not being told. And at some point, it becomes obvious that things are being hidden that the public needs to know. And is it simply because it exposes law enforcement and their Minority Report detective work that they're doing now? They have to ease this stuff in slowly, right? They can't do it abruptly. If we found it out right now, everybody would revolt, and they can't have that. Or is it more than that? Is it Brian Koberger was framed? And it's hard for me to believe sometimes that he was framed, because why? Why would he be framed? So I was talking about this with Leslie, and she said, well, he, you know, the interview at the police department, and most people I think know this by now, but that interview at the police department for an internship is something that anybody that's a PhD criminology student at WSU needs to do as part of their curriculum for their PhD. So it's not like he was a PhD student and was like, oh, hey, and then I just want to like start working here part-time or something. No, it was part of his curriculum at the school, right? So he had to apply for these things. And that was the one he chose, right? It's the one they probably point them to often. I'm sure they likely have PhD candidates there right now doing internships. You know, this is what they do. And so, you know, the theory was, well, when he went there, he rubbed them the wrong way. You know, he came in acting like he's a big shot, and that pissed them off, which is possible, right? I mean, I can see how this happens. In real life, I've seen things like this happen. People are threatened by people that know more than them, or maybe he's just arrogant and a dick and they didn't like that. And so that's one of the theories, right? That's why they would frame him, because like, this guy's a dick, let's just frame him. The other, which is plausible, right? But like, you have to say it out loud and really think about it logically. I mean, that's a lot you're putting on somebody for just like pissing you off in an interview, right? Why not just give them, I don't know, a ticket for driving under the limit, or harass, you know, bother them in some other way, or just don't hire them. It's fine. It's fair, right? Like that's a theory. Another theory is he found something out. He saw something somewhere that exposed something, drug trafficking, child trafficking, whatever it is. He found it out, and therefore they had to get rid of him, right? That's the other one. That's the other theory, right? But if you think about that logically, what happened first then? he found this out, and so their way to silence him would be to have somebody kill 4 people and then frame him, because that doesn't make any sense, right? That's outlandish. There's other ways to silence people than to kill 4 people and frame them, right? So then it would mean that the murders happened, and then they were like, this is our perfect opportunity to get this guy who knows things he doesn't know, who could possibly sink us. Let's frame it on him. And that doesn't seem plausible to me either. Is it possible? Yes, but it doesn't seem probable or plausible, right? So then the other theory is, I'm just thinking of all the theories I've heard. The other theory is, this was all drug trafficking, and somehow he's connected to these drug traffickers because he still does drugs, and he takes drugs, and he buys drugs. And these girls were killed because their parents were snitches. And so he became this group that did this. He became the person they were framing for this. But it still doesn't answer why. Is it because he hung out with them and did coke with them and they think he's a dick? So they just figured we'll frame it on him. Right? I'm trying to understand it. I'm not being sarcastic. People sometimes think that when I'm not. I'm genuinely just asking simple questions and wondering what people think about that. To logically break it down in your head and think about the plausibility of these things. And I don't know. I'm just asking questions because it's not clicking yet. And it sure seems like they don't have much of a case from what Ann is saying. And I really hope the Franks is granted. I don't know that it will make a difference. Maybe when everything comes out, it's not going to be as big as it sounds. They do this in a lot of trials. In the Karen Reed trial, David Yannetti promised to deliver big, and they did deliver stuff, but it didn't come off as much as I think they would have liked it to. In the Delphi case, they talked about the hair around Abby's finger. And then we later find out it was Kelsey German's, which people then decide to blow up. But I was still like, what? I thought that was a big boom, but a lot of people didn't. But the point I'm trying to make is we all know how lawyers will say things, exaggerate slightly, just ever so slightly, in favor of their client. Both sides do it. It's fair game. It's fair game in the courts. The judge is there to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. So I really want to hear this Frank's motion. Some days I'm just convinced 100% that he is not 100%. Some days I'm much more convinced than others that he's innocent. And then other days I just go back to that middle ground because I'm just not there yet. I'm just not there. It feels a lot like Delphi right now. It's that messy. It's messy like Delphi. We all know what's going on with Delphi. It's imploding right now. I just keep hoping, praying for justice and for the truth to come out. And I just love how creative and imaginative and dedicated and smart, so many creators are that are covering this case, and how many people are so interested in it. And many people do it, because it's just for the love of it, for the joy of it, for the interest to help something, to help other people, right? It's not like even the creators that have bigger channels are getting paid buku bucks on this, which is what I don't understand when people make fun of people, or not when people make fun of, but when people shit on other people for getting paid for this. What do I care if you charge, $15 for a membership? If people are willing to pay it, good for you. That's awesome. Right? I don't care. Or if you charge $3.99 for a member, why do I care? Why do I care if people are giving you super chats and you're making bank? Good for you. I'm actually happy for you. So I don't understand when people get put down for for that kind of stuff. I don't get it. Why are you counting somebody else's money? You know, like that's what YouTube is here for some people, you know. But regardless, I mean, I'm not monetized because I don't think they would. I didn't ever try, but I want to be able to say what I want without being censored and being threatened and all these other things. That's worth more to me right now. And I'm able to do it, so why not? But now I'm way off on a tangent, guys. Let's listen to the rest of Roger.
And constant harassment by various media outlets. So it's been devastating in some ways. In many ways, it just re-victimizes folks who have already suffered this terrible trauma.
What is next for this investigation?
Well,
So, you know, after he said that, it made me think about some of the things I said in my last live about Dylan and Bethany. And while I still stand strong in the sense of like, I feel like they owe it to the victims to come back and testify. I really don't know. I can't believe people dox and threaten and harass, and it's just beyond me. That's unacceptable, right? Obviously, me just speculating makes me feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, you do have to use some rationality here and look at things for what they are. And I think, you know, I know I'm not the only person that's skeptical of these two roommates. But I try to temper that with, I really don't know what happened at the end of the day. What if they were just like drugged or heavily traumatized and in psychosis? I mean, people can snap from lesser things. People will snap for lesser reasons. So, I mean, that's a pretty good reason to become like in shock or delirious or whatever. But there's still things that are unexplained, like the long timeline and the texting. That's a problem.
This investigation is not cold. We get tips every day that are viable. We get dozens and dozens of tips. We sort through them, we prioritize them, and for sure, some of them are not good tips. They're not even relevant to the case. But every single day, we get a good amount of viable tips, and those tips help us do everything from clear people who maybe there was some speculation about to further some of the theories that we're working on. So the next is just to continue on what we're doing, eliminate the information that we know is not going to be relevant to the investigation, and take all the new information. And eventually, and we see this coming, eventually we're going to narrow in on exactly what happened and who did it.
December 13th, guys. December 13th is when he
Take us
said that.
back
Whoops.
when investigators first started asking for video.
Sorry. So if you heard what he just said, right? December 13th was the date of that video. And at the end, he ties it up with every day we're getting more tips, more and more tips. We have this incredible team. We have a command center. The Utah FBI is here. We are going through it. And those tips help us clear people that may be suspects. They help us determine if we should throw things out that won't be relevant at this point. They help us develop further theories. Every day, they help us get closer. And that was on December 13th. And at the end, he sounded optimistic and sort of resolute. It's like to the point where we're going to find someone. He didn't say those exact words, but I believe this is likely the person who comforted Mrs. Gonzalez and said, don't worry, we are going to get this person. Because that's December 13th. And I wonder, was that STR back yet? I could probably look it up, but I've been on here a long time. So what happened on December 12th? Well, December 12th is when Extreme Network server, Kaylee's server, was unlocked, and they were able to look inside of there. Where was the DNA on December 12th? Was there any communication from anyone on December 13th? I know there are answers to these questions, And I know that I've looked them up before, but once again, the timeline. So I think I touched on all the topics I wanted to, but at the end of the day, I still don't understand how they got to Brian Koberger. Is there, an informant like Pop says? Is that what it is? It doesn't seem like it right now, but I mean, just from the court stuff, but it does leave that possibility open. GEDmatch calls people whose DNA they utilize to develop leads for suspects genetic witnesses. So is that one of the witnesses or informant that Steve Gonsalves allegedly was going to meet before the FBI once again intervened, according to the text between he and Brett Norton, if you believe that those are real, which I'm 50-50 on. It could go either way with me because that's how messed up this world is and crazy things are. But if you take that as true, is this witness that he was going to talk to, was this a relative of Brian Koberger? Or was this some criminal informant? What's going to come out of trial that's going to be potentially embarrassing for these families that Steve Gonsalves touched on? Imagine the stress those two are under. Love them or hate them. Empathy for the level of stress that they're dealing with here. Okay, so timeline. Let me try to run through it one more time quickly. AT&T search warrant. Got all the bank records from the victims and stuff like that. Let's see. I'm just looking at this affidavit here. Oh, is this the one? This is Brett Payne's affidavit. He's talking about the case here. They found the latent shoe print. Let's not forget about that. The latent shoe print. What do you guys think about that? I mean, is it possible that there were so many people walking around that they then got nervous because they messed up the crime scene and they cleaned it up before they called the cops? And that's the only one they couldn't get up? I mean, what's the explanation for this? Because this is something that's important. Because that latent shoe print was found, I think, the next day because there had been a cleanup. It's just another question, right? Yeah, because they had to give it luminol or whatever, amino black. They didn't see it without the amino black, which means it was cleaned up. How clean was that floor? The video canvases they're talking about. I mean, I can't, going through this again and again after a while, it just makes you dizzy, right? This is, I just want to show you one more thing here, if I can get back to it. Let me get back to it here. This, I want to find, actually, no, hold on. I want to show you this, because I forgot about this as well. This one here. It's like December. It's Sergeant Blaker's affidavit, and I read it and I forgot how long it was. Like it's interesting what he says in here. Let me see if I can find it. There we go. I will find it. It's really interesting to go back and look at this stuff now. Like I'm looking at the Tinder and then they have like 19 redacted names. Like those are probably 19 people that Kaylee was in contact with. They're not going to give those names out. That's embarrassing as hell. And then Brian's, and then there were more redacted names. These are people. And it's probably around, they probably called these people, right? And that's how that girl ended up on TV, is my guess, right? When they're calling these people that had connected with whether it was Kaylee or Brian on Tinder, they're trying to find some connection between these two. They couldn't find one, right? But they interviewed those people. You get a phone call one day because you were on Tinder at some point and you were connecting with someone who now has been accused of killing 4 people. And out of those 19 people, one of them came forward to the news because they heard a leak somewhere. And they called her and she says, yeah, he was weird. He told me I had good birthing hips. That was probably right after that Tinder thing the discovery got back. I bet if we looked at the timing. And I bet you we could time a lot of those kind of leaks to when some of this discovery comes back. Because people are getting contacted throughout this, right? They're getting warrants. They're looking at things. They're finding people in this person's sphere and they're calling them and talking to them. But what I'm really looking for right now, let me close and see if I can find it a different way. I want to look at the court documents. So here, let's see. All right, let me try it one more time. Looking for Blaker's affidavit. Because I forgot or never even read this. Okay. This is such a great way to go back and kind of review, though, because you can kind of see more of the investigation. And some of the things that I used to think were suspicious, I don't think are suspicious anymore. The extreme networks really still intrigues me because Steve G commented on it. It was on, right around that time, the 12th. It was right around the time where they felt like leads were starting to take formation and will come to a conclusion. It just makes me think there's something in that server. And is that what's embarrassing? But how would that tie to Brian? Right? All right. I'm just hoping that eventually I am going to find this affidavit. See here, like 19 redacted accounts, because those are the people that they were talking to. I don't know why it seems so obvious to me now. Before I just wasn't putting it together. It is interesting that it's 19 for all of these people, though. Like, is that the max you can have on your Twitter roster, or on your Tinder roster, guys? I wouldn't know. I've never been on there. I know what it is, but here, he reflects on last month and where the investigation is headed. December 13th. I'm telling you, I feel like December 13th is the day that something was discovered that changed everything. And I want to know what that is. And somebody else has probably figured it out already. But let's see. Got to be here somewhere. Warrant subpoena. Was the federal grand jury regarding Brian Koberger? Well, it wasn't regarding him. His parents were subpoenaed for Dana Smithers. Is that the federal grand jury that elicited 71 subpoenas? Were they trying to indict Koberger for that murder and it didn't go anywhere? They said it was an investigative federal grand jury. I think that's what they all are. And if they don't lead to an indictment, then it's just done with. But is that the only federal grand jury in this case? Is that all that is? The federal grand jury thing? Is that? I can't find it. How frustrating. If you're still hanging, I appreciate it. You know, I'm going to put on some tunes while I look for this. So I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to see if I can find this, and then I'm going to wrap up. And if you've hung with me this long, I really appreciate it, guys. All right.
Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay. Cause my messages are timeless, so they'll put them on display. Oh yeah, I rap with a certainty, I have a sense of urgency. A message for eternity, for everyone internally. I had some people burning me, but now they fucking learn to see I ain't the one to fuck with. Now they looking nervously, and I don't really care what you think of me respectfully. You can kick rocks if you think you're fucking better, see. I will outwork you, turn you to an enemy. Hurt you so bad that you're gonna need some therapy. I got the motherfucking recipe. I've been cooking up hits, I'ma leave a legacy. You'll be looking small when you're standing right next to me. I'm 5'10", bitch, but I'm 10 feet next to me. I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way. Yeah, I'ma do it my way. I can't contain it, I'm coming out with a statement. You really changed, man, all your music and arrangement. You don't know shit, shut your mouth, you can save it. I'm the same dude that got his come up from the basement. 100 songs, 100 weeks, didn't change it. Experiments, development, intelligence, and patience. I'll do it all again, cause I never feel complacent. Let's keep the good vibes, positivity's contagious. I'm never looking back, cause I made a life that's passionate. A college graduate suppressing all his talents, yeah. He found a way to go and change, become an advocate. For taking control of your life, go out and battle. And you think you have a dream, then act on it. Get after it, get out your head and fucking capture it. You got one life to master it. Don't give up on your future, we all start losers. We're all late bloomers, gotta struggle through the sewer. What you say? Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yeah, I'ma do it my way. Yeah, I'ma do it my way.
Okay. Let me see. So I was not able to find what I was looking for, which is fine. But I did want to say one last thing before I go. I keep thinking about Christie saying on December 13th, and we have Roger Lanier saying on December 13th something similar, which is like the investigation is forming now, like it's taking shape. And I think he's probably the one that said to her, we're definitely going to get this person. And she specifically said, this was the most interesting part, his name was being swirled around. That was December 13th. Now, December 19th is when we're told that the familial or investigative genetic genealogy was back, right? That it was a biological father. So the name didn't come from the genetic genealogy, did it? Or did they have the name December 13th? And then the father's DNA was tested against that DNA. And they said, this is somebody who's related to the suspect that we have. This is where my brain starts to go in circles. And that's probably what Anna's going crazy about too, because they should be able to just give a timeline. Like and maybe the ISP, like the date they got that, the date they sent it to Othram, and then the date it was sent to the FBI. I need those 3 dates. I would really like those 3 dates. Are they around somewhere? They've got to be around somewhere, right? That's actually, I finally figured out what I really want. What I really want is the 3 dates. If anybody knows them, put them in the chat. I want to know when ISP received the DNA, when Othram received the DNA, and when the FBI received the DNA. Because when Othram had the DNA, they built out the profile, but using legal searches of databases, were unable to provide a match. And they probably could have found it, but they didn't want to do that. They said, you know what? We don't want to get in trouble. You're the federal government if you want to do it. And the FBI, they already knew they were going to do it. They've probably done it before. So the FBI takes over the case. And the only thing they do at this point is they take the DNA and run it through genealogical databases that policy-wise they shouldn't be searching. And that's when they were able to come up with this suspect, right? That's a lot to do to plant someone, though. Like, I think I just need those 3 dates first. If anybody knows them, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to have to try to find them. And I feel like I keep trying to find them, and then I get distracted with other shit about this case. So it's the date ISP received the DNA, the date Othram received the DNA, the date the FBI received the DNA. Those 3 things, I think, would be helpful for me to sort some things out. Anyway, I have rambled on much longer than I thought I was capable of. And anybody who hung with me, listened, found any value in this, any of that stuff, I just want to say I appreciate you for being here. And I hope you guys all have a good rest of the day. And let me just put on some music so we can sign off. Have a good day, guys.